The smell of burnt toast always takes me back to that week. Not the actual toast, mind you, but the pervasive, acrid scent of something going terribly, irrevocably wrong. A smell that clung to the back of my throat for days, a phantom reminder of an impending unpleasantness. It was supposed to be a simple arrangement, a temporary pause in the domestic symphony. My brother Liam was in a bit of a bind. Not a crisis precisely, but a recurring episode of what he liked to call financial recalibration, a euphemism for a self-engineered budget deficit. My parents, bless their perpetually soft hearts, had offered him a place to stay for a few weeks, a temporary port in his self-created storm. This, naturally, came with the implicit understanding that I, being the responsible one, the stable one, the one who hadn't needed parental bailout since college, would be the one to manage the situation. Manage. A polite word I'd learned over the years for absorb the fallout, cushion the blow, and generally be the adult in the room while Liam navigated his latest self-inflicted drama, a drama I was expected to both facilitate and contain. The trouble started almost immediately, as it always did. Liam has a way of making everything about him, a talent honed to a fine art. It's not malicious precisely, but a profound, unshakable self-absorption that acts like a gravitational pull, drawing all attention, all resources, all comfort towards his orbit. My parents, who live a comfortable drive away, were thrilled to have him. "It's family, dear," my mother had chirped on the phone, her voice a little too bright, a practiced cheerfulness that rarely masked an underlying tremor of anxiety. "He needs us." And then the subtle addition, the one that always landed like a tiny sharp pebble in my otherwise placid existence. "And he'll be staying with you, won't he? Since you're not traveling right now." The travel part was the kicker, the unexpected obstacle in my meticulously planned escape. I had been planning a trip, a solo backpacking adventure I'd saved for diligently, a chance to disconnect, recalibrate myself, as Liam might put it, away from the constant hum of familial expectations and obligations. But then Liam's situation had materialized, a perfectly timed entanglement of financial woes and parental sympathy, and suddenly my well-earned plans were deemed inconvenient. My parents, caught between their deep-seated desire to help Liam and their equally deep-seated avoidance of conflict, had essentially delegated the Liam management to me. He would stay at their house, of course, a safe haven of familiar comforts, but my role was to oversee things, which in their minds translated to me being the point person for any issues, the liaison between Liam's chaotic orbit and their ordered existence, the one who would deal with the inevitable ripple effects his presence would cause, the one who would absorb the inevitable collateral damage. The initial conversation with my parents felt like being handed a ticking clock, a responsibility I hadn't solicited but couldn't refuse. "He'll be there for maybe 2-3 weeks, darling," my mother had said, her voice laced with a desperate optimism, "just until he gets back on his feet. He's promised to be no trouble." My father's voice, always a little too placid, a gentle murmur designed to soothe rather than engage, was punctuated by my mother's enthusiastic agreement. They painted a picture of Liam as a temporary guest, a mild inconvenience, a brief disruption in the otherwise smooth flow of their lives. I knew better. Liam's temporary, often stretched into the indefinite, a fluid concept he treated with a casual disregard for timelines. And no trouble was a notion he approached with a playful, almost mischievous skepticism. He'd leave a trail of forgotten bills, passive-aggressive notes tucked into unlikely places, and unwashed dishes piled precariously in the sink, a silent testament to his transient tendency. The trap wasn't elaborate. It was almost laughably simple, born from a deep, quiet weariness that had settled into my bones like a persistent chill. It was a response to years of feeling like the designated family buffer, the emotional cleanup crew, the one who always had to be the bigger person, the more understanding one, the one who absorbed the friction so others wouldn't have to. I spent the first few days in a state of simmering anxiety, the unspoken burden of my parents' expectations, a heavy cloak woven from their well-meaning but ultimately demanding love, heavy on my shoulders. Liam arrived, radiating his usual blend of charm and feigned helplessness, a potent cocktail that always disarmed our parents. He charmed my mother with tales of his job search, which involved more caffeine-fueled coffee shop meetings than actual interviews, more networking than concrete leads. He managed to convince my father that his networking was a crucial, albeit abstract, part of his career development, a necessary investment of time and energy. He also, predictably, began to insinuate himself into my life, a slow, steady erosion of my personal space and peace. He'd call my phone at odd hours, the screen lighting up with his name, needing a ride to some nebulous appointment, a sounding board for his latest brilliant idea that rarely materialized, or just to vent about how unfair everything was, how the world was conspiring against his inherent brilliance. He'd borrow things from my apartment, items I'd carefully curated and cherished, books I was eager to dive into, chargers vital for my digital life, even a favorite scarf I'd been looking forward to wearing as the weather turned cooler. Each time it felt like a small erosion of my boundaries, a tiny chip taken out of my carefully constructed piece, a reminder that my needs were secondary to his. My parents, blissfully unaware of the daily microaggressions, the subtle infringements on my autonomy, would call and ask how Liam was doing, their voices laced with a mixture of pride and relief. "He's settling in so well," my mother would say, her tone genuinely pleased. "You're doing such a wonderful job looking after him. You're such a good sister." That was the moment the real plan began to form, not with a burst of righteous anger or a dramatic declaration, but with a cold, clear decision, a quiet recalibration of my own purpose. The gratitude in my mother's voice, the way she'd praised my helpfulness, the effortless way she'd cast me in the role of responsible caretaker, felt like a well-intentioned but deeply patronizing pat on the head. They saw me as the dutiful daughter, the one who would absorb their son's disruption without complaint, the silent pillar of support. They underestimated my capacity for quiet observation, for strategic patience, for the slow, deliberate accumulation of knowledge. The trap involved information. Not gossip, not secrets, not anything that could be construed as malicious intent, but facts. Facts that Liam, in his self-involved narrative, his carefully constructed facade of impending success, conveniently omitted. I started by subtly asking Liam about his plans, his future endeavors. Not probing, not interrogating, just casual conversation, the kind you have over a shared meal or during a brief encounter in the kitchen. "So what are you thinking for the next few months, Liam? When things really get going? Any timelines you're working with?" He'd offer vague assurances about big opportunities on the horizon and potential investors lining up. His words like smoke, promising but insubstantial. I'd nod, a small neutral smile on my face, and then in a separate conversation a few days later, I'd ask my parents a similarly neutral question, framing it as innocent curiosity. "Mom, Dad, I was just wondering, Liam mentioned he was looking into some new ventures, some entrepreneurial pursuits. Did he say anything specific about the funding for that? I'm just curious about how he's planning to manage the initial startup costs, like securing capital or any personal investment." The question was designed to be open-ended, to invite detail without demanding it, to offer a seemingly innocent hook for their own observations. The first instance was met with a slight pause, a barely perceptible hesitation that spoke volumes. "Well, darling, he said he had some promising leads," my mother replied, her voice a little less confident than before, a hint of uncertainty creeping in. "He's very resourceful, Always has been." The emphasis on his resourcefulness felt like a preemptive defense, a way to shield him from any perceived criticism. The second time, a week later, I asked about a specific piece of equipment he'd alluded to needing for one of his many phantom projects. He said it was a significant investment, that industrial-grade printer he was talking about. I was just curious if he'd secured a loan, or if it was more of a personal investment from a partner. Just trying to get a sense of the scale of things. This time the pause was longer, more pronounced. My father cleared his throat, a subtle signal of discomfort. He didn't go into a lot of detail, dear. He's handling his own affairs. We trust him to manage his own finances." The words were meant to be reassuring, but they carried the weight of unspoken doubt. The trap wasn't about exposing Liam as a failure or a fraud, not directly. It was about allowing my parents to discover the extent of his creative storytelling, his talent for embellishment and omission, for themselves without any input from me other than my innocent-seeming questions, my mild curiosity. I continued this pattern, weaving my inquiries into casual family discussions, over Sunday dinners, during brief phone calls, or in the pleasant preamble to a shared activity. I'd ask about lease agreements he claimed to have signed for temporary office spaces, about potential business partners he bragged about meeting over expensive coffees, about funding rounds he'd implied were imminent and substantial. Each query was designed to elicit a specific response, a piece of information that, when juxtaposed with Liam's narrative, would reveal the incongruity. Each time my parents' answers became more hesitant, their reassurances more strained. The rose-tinted glasses they wore when it came to Liam, Lenses crafted from years of proud pronouncements and aspirational hopes started to develop a few distinct cracks. They were beginning to notice the gaps in his stories, the way his resourcefulness seemed to involve more promises than tangible results, more abstract concepts than concrete achievements. They were starting to see the pattern, the familiar refrain of impending success that never quite arrived. The turning point for me wasn't a dramatic confrontation, no shouting match or tearful accusation. It was a quiet realization, a small domestic scene that crystallized everything. I was in the kitchen preparing a simple meal, and I watched Liam casually help himself to a bottle of my expensive olive oil, a staple I'd meticulously bought for myself after careful consideration of its quality and cost, and then, without a flicker of acknowledgement or apology, he discarded the empty bottle in the recycling bin, its presence now a mere inconvenience. My parents had specifically asked him to be mindful of household expenses, to contribute in small ways, and he'd nodded enthusiastically, his eyes already scanning for his next convenience, his next effortless acquisition. In that moment, as I surveyed the discarded bottle, I understood with a chilling clarity that my silence, my continued role as the accommodating one, my willingness to absorb his disruptions, was not just enabling this disregard, it was actively encouraging it. So, I stopped asking Liam directly about his plans, his progress. Instead, I'd ask my parents about the things he was supposedly doing, framing my questions around their prior conversations with him. Mom, Liam mentioned he was really excited about that new co-working space he was supposed to sign up for, the one with the great amenities. Did he end up getting a spot? I was just curious if it was a good fit for him. My mother's sigh was audible even over the phone, a weary expulsion of breath that conveyed a wealth of unspoken disappointment. He decided against it, darling, she said, her voice tinged with a subtle but distinct weariness. Said it wasn't the right fit after all. He's exploring other options, he said. More flexible ones. My father's voice chimed in, a low rumble of fatigue. He's still looking for that office space, he added, his tone lacking its usual gentle assurance. It's proving more difficult than he anticipated. Finding the perfect place, you know? The implied struggle was a thinly veiled admission of the lack of actual progress. The narrative was shifting slowly but surely. My parents were starting to see that Liam's plans were perpetually just out of reach, that his opportunities were always about to materialize but never quite did. They were piecing together the evidence I was subtly providing, not through accusation, not through direct revelation, but through earnest, almost naive inquiry. They weren't being told Liam was unreliable. They were being nudged, gently but persistently, to observe his patterns themselves, to connect the dots of his ever-shifting narratives. The real consequence, the quiet humiliation that settled over our family, came a few weeks later. Liam's stay had stretched well past the initial few weeks, a testament to his ability to maintain his presence through sheer inertia and parental indulgence. He was still at my parents' house, still charming them with his anecdotes, his tales of near misses and impending breakthroughs, but the undercurrent of doubt, the subtle erosion of their faith, was palpable. One evening during a family video call, a virtual gathering designed to maintain a sense of connection, my mother brought up Liam's living situation, her voice softer than usual, tinged with a hesitant concern. Liam, darling, she began, her gaze fixed on his image on the screen, a gentle probing rather than an aggressive questioning. We were just talking, your father and I. We're all a bit worried about your progress, about where you're headed. Have you had any concrete offers for that new role you were so excited about? The one with the impressive salary. Liam, ever the showman, launched into his usual spiel, a practiced monologue about things being in the pipeline and impressing the right people. His words a familiar blend of optimism and vagueness. But then my father, his voice devoid of its usual placidity, his tone now carrying a new weight of weary resignation, cut in. Liam, we need to be realistic, he said, his gaze steady, unwavering. Your mother and I have been going over the finances, and, well, the money you've been relying on from your investors hasn't materialized, has it? Not in any tangible way. And that job you were so excited about. The one with the great salary, you didn't actually get an offer, did you? Be honest with us. The silence on Liam's end of the call was deafening, a vast expanse of unspoken truths and deferred realities. He stammered, his usual smooth patter dissolving into disjointed excuses, a desperate attempt to salvage his carefully constructed facade. My mother looked at him with a mixture of sadness and disappointment, her maternal pride visibly deflating. My father's expression was grimly resolute, the placidity replaced by a quiet determination. "We've supported you, Liam," my father continued, his voice steady, unwavering, carrying the authority of a parent who had reached the end of his rope. "We've always supported you. But we can't keep doing this. We can't keep enabling this cycle. You need to face facts. You need to get a stable job, not chase phantom opportunities. You need to be responsible. Truly responsible." Liam finally mumbled something about needing to leave, about needing space, about the pressure being too much. He didn't blame me. He probably didn't even register my role in the unfolding realization, my subtle orchestration of the inevitable. He was too busy wrestling with the sudden, stark clarity of his parents' disillusionment, the undeniable weight of their disappointment. He packed a bag that afternoon, a hurried, almost shamefaced departure, and left my parents' house with a vague promise to figure things out. A promise that hung in the air, hollow and unconvincing. The aftermath wasn't a grand celebration. No fanfare or victorious pronouncements. My parents called me later that night, their voices subdued, a quiet echo of their earlier confrontation. They apologized for putting me in a difficult position, for not seeing Liam's situation more clearly themselves, for their own naive optimism. They acknowledged that I had been right to be cautious, though they didn't explicitly say why, their embarrassment a palpable presence in their hushed tones. They were embarrassed, their pride a little bruised. They had been so eager to believe in their son's potential, so willing to overlook the red flags, so easily swayed by his charm and their own hopeful projections. I listened, offering quiet, measured responses, a calm counterpoint to their subdued emotions. There was no triumph, no "I told you so," no cathartic release of pent-up frustration, just a quiet exhale, a slow release of tension. The air in my lungs felt cleaner, less burdened. The acrid smell of burnt toast was finally fading, replaced by the crisp, clean scent of clarity. I hadn't sought revenge. I had simply allowed the truth to surface gently, patiently, from its carefully constructed hiding place, allowing the natural consequences of Liam's own actions and my parents' enabling behavior to unfold. And in the quiet, uncomfortable space that followed, a subtle but significant shift had occurred. The designated buffer, the family's emotional sponge, had become, for a brief, potent moment, an architect of emotional justice, a quiet force that allowed reality to assert itself. And that, in its own way, felt like enough.